Few weapons in the history of warfare have instilled as much fear in their opponent as the German army's Tiger tank of World War II. When it emerged onto the battlefields of North Africa and the Soviet Union in 1942, it immediately proved itself a superior armored fighting vehicle, surpassing all Allied tanks then in service thanks to its heavy armor providing it protection from all but the biggest guns, while itself sporting the awesomely effective 88mm KWK-36 gun. While built in comparatively few numbers compared to tanks such as the M4 Sherman or the T-34, its reputation on the battlefield as a superb tank killer far exceeded its direct material impact, giving rise to the Tiger terror that haunted many Allied tank crews as they went into combat. Even in the hands of an inexperienced crew, the Tiger was a formidable weapon, but when manned by skilled tankers, it was at times almost unstoppable, and some of Germany's greatest tank aces would earn their status in these vehicles, often taking on greater numbers of enemy tanks in a single engagement and coming out on top. In today's episode, we will examine the story of Michael Wittmann, probably the most celebrated of his peers within Nazi Germany, becoming the poster boy for the Tiger Force within German propaganda. A Tiger ace, his fame and celebrity status might lead one to believe that Michael Wittmann was all hype. However, in truth, he may even have been more fearsome than his incredible reputation. Welcome to Wars of the World. Michael Wittmann came, like so many in the German countryside in the second decade of the 20th century, from a family of farmers. Born on April 22nd, 1914, in the village of Wolgerthal in Bavaria, and having an upbringing steeped in the Catholic faith, at age 16, after completing his compulsory education, Wittmann did as many young German boys did at that time, and went to work for his father on the family farm. Being such an influential time in the development of his character, farm life instilled in him the opinion that through hard work, one does succeed in life and find their place. He also learned the importance of teamwork in order to achieve goals, and basic mechanical skills of large agricultural machinery, such as tractors, both in their operation and maintenance, skills which would serve him well in the future. Given this entry into adulthood, he was suitably prepared to leave the family farm at 19 and joined the Voluntary Labour Service, or FAD, which had been set up by the German government in 1931 to ease the burden on the public sector during the Great Depression. After Hitler came to power, the FAD was retained as it was a cheap source of labour, but very soon, the Third Reich saw the organisation as a way of indoctrinating young, impressionable boys into their National Socialist agenda. The emphasis on hard but rewarding work with like-minded individuals working towards a goal greatly appealed to Wittmann, and this naturally led towards him pursuing a path in a military aspect as Hitler began to throw off the shackles of the Treaty of Versailles and moved to rearm Germany. For many young men like Wittmann, it was an exciting and intoxicating time, and he very much wanted to be a part of it. Having informed his family of his decision, on October 30th, 1934, he joined the German army and went into the infantry, being based near Munich. Wittmann adapted well to military life, but after an encounter with a small Panzer I during a training session, he became fascinated with tanks and made it his ambition to join the new armoured divisions that were slowly being created in Germany. Again, his experience on the farm concerning machinery meant he had little trouble picking up how the small tank worked. After completing his 2 years of service, he briefly found employment as a railway worker before feeling the call to return to military service. However, instead of the army, he joined the SS, membership of which in Nazi Germany would open many doors for him in the future. Compared to the army, joining the SS was a far more difficult undertaking. Physical and medical requirements, as well as background checks, were all vigorously enforced, and many applicants were washed out, but not Wittmann. Shortly after acceptance, he was pleased to find he would be joining an armored car unit, and he was soon transferred to an elite SS unit, acting as Hitler's personal bodyguards in Berlin. Aged 25, Wittmann of the SS found himself participating in the Poland campaign, which ultimately instigated the Second World War. Now a commander of his own armored car team, his SS unit was still subservient to the Wehrmacht, and he kept his crew engaged primarily in forward reconnaissance roles, as well as protecting the Wehrmacht's flanks from enemy troops. Starting on September 1st in the opening engagements, Wittmann and his SS comrades encountered stubborn Polish resistance, but before long, the Poles were in retreat and soon routed. On September 25th, Hitler was so confident in his bodyguard units that he inspected them personally in the field. Having forced the Poles to surrender, Wittmann and his men were then engaged in securing their new lands before returning to Germany over Christmas for rest and retraining in order to prepare for the Western campaign against Britain and France. Wittmann's unit was assigned to General Feder von Brock's Army Group B, which, instead of hitting France directly, was tasked with attacking then-neutral Holland and covering the main thrust of the German army through Belgium. Charging into Holland, Wittmann and his comrades captured several key towns, villages, and bridges without firing a shot, as the Dutch defenders were caught totally by surprise. Advancing towards and then capturing Rotterdam, the SS units eventually turned south towards France, finding their once feared great enemy demoralized and tired, and unable to offer effective defense against the German blitzkrieg, although the British Expeditionary Force was able to escape home via Dunkirk before France fell completely. Once again, Wittmann and his armored cars were used to police the newly captured territory in France before returning to Germany to re-equip. His unit were now ditching their armored cars for the much harder-hitting Stug 3 assault gun. Built on the chassis of a Panzer III tank, the assault gun lacked a fully rotating turret, requiring the vehicle to turn in the general direction of the target, but the vehicle was not intended to fight it out with enemy tanks, instead being intended for clearing away enemy fortifications. However, armed with a 75mm gun, a rather powerful weapon for an armored fighting vehicle at the beginning of the war, the Stug 3 would ultimately find itself increasingly used in the anti-armor role, particularly to lay ambushes or snipe at enemy formations from a high vantage point. Training on the use of the Stug 3 was intense and as realistic as possible to prepare Wittmann and his unit for the upcoming Russian campaign. First, however, they were to support Germany's invasion of Yugoslavia as part of its aid to Italy fighting Greece. Entering Yugoslavia from neighboring Bulgaria on April 7th, Wittmann's unit struck southwest, through the Balkan country, and into Greece. Wittmann regularly displayed both his courage and skill in handling the Stug 3, and during the advance, he used a storm to help conceal his approach to an enemy fortification, allowing him to get close enough to lay waste to it, allowing SS troops to break through in his wake. By April 30th, Yugoslavia and Greece had fallen, and Wittmann and his men participated in a parade through Athens to celebrate their victory. But of course, the real test of their mettle was still to come. Relocating to Bohemia for a brief rest and to make preparations for the next phase of the war, on the eve of the invasion of the Soviet Union, dubbed Operation Barbarossa by the Germans, Wittmann's unit found itself held back in reserve when the initial assault began on June 22, 1941. Finally advancing eastward on June 27th, they joined the SS Viking Division to march on Zamość. The Soviet army could do little to hold the Nazi juggernaut at this early stage of the war, with the German and Axis blitzkrieg encircling poorly organized Soviet defenders and choking them to death, either by isolating them from their supply lines or obliterating them with air power and artillery. Wittmann and his Stug 3, which had been nicknamed Buzzard by its crew, continued in assisting in blasting away defensive fortifications. But then, on July 12th, his gunner spotted a formation of Soviet vehicles moving ahead of their position, trying to escape another impending encirclement. They quickly identified the vehicles as being the dreaded T-34-76, and there were 18 operating in two groups. At this point in the war, the T-34-76 was still a much-feared weapon, that could match many of the Panzers and tank destroyers fielded by the Germans. Wittmann ordered an armor-piercing shell to be loaded into the Stug 3's gun, and after taking up a better position on a nearby hill, fired on and destroyed his first of these impressive Red Army tanks. But he wasn't done yet, and in the ensuing melee he knocked out 5 more, earning him respect and recognition from all ranks within the SS. With superior tactics, the Germans were able to counter the T-34's advantages initially, but more and more of them would appear in the coming months and would take their toll on the Germans. Given the enormous demands on German armor in Russia, many German tank crews found themselves spread thinly, especially when it came to the assault guns. As a result, Wittmann soon found himself having to learn how to fight with the vehicle on its own, with little support, as he gave SS infantry units a powerful punch against enemy positions. In August, Wittmann's Stug 3 also engaged in combat with a Soviet gunboat during the battle for the city of Kherson, sinking it before firing on a nearby Soviet submarine. Having been wounded by exploding shell fragments, he was withdrawn for some rest, whereupon he was bestowed various awards for his courage and skill, including the Iron Cross First Class. The officers of the SS also took note of him, seeing him as a role model for the men under his command, being quiet and dignified behind the lines, yet courageous and determined on the battlefield. Additionally, he was tasked with training new Stug 3 crew members at the front, his commanders hoping he could pass on some of his skill to the younger men. Yet neither Wittmann nor anyone else in the German army could change its fortunes by winter, and as both sides settled in to fight the cold as well as each other, Wittmann found himself headed back to Germany to become an officer and to train on a new weapon. As he had done previously, Wittmann excelled in his efforts to become an officer in the SS, and upon completing his training, he found himself assigned to one of the SS's newest and most potent war machines, the Tiger tank. With heavy armor and a superlative 88mm gun, the Tiger was a true threat to all but the heaviest of Soviet armor by the summer of 1943, and it was desperately needed on the front line at that time, as the Soviets began pushing the Germans back. Returning to the Eastern Front, Wittmann and his Tiger were to play a prominent role in Hitler's Operation Citadel, a massive pincer attack on Soviet forces involving the bulk of Germany's armored corps. With Soviet armored forces now bursting with T-34s and KV series tanks, the Germans expected the new Tigers and Panthers to confront Soviet quantity with German quality. Unfortunately for Wittmann and his comrades, German quality was lacking, however, as the rush to get the new tanks into the fight saw many corners being cut, leading to chronic breakdowns. Nevertheless, Wittmann and his crew pressed on towards their objective, the city of Kursk. The resulting battles for Kursk would bear witness to armored warfare reaching its zenith, and would produce the largest tank battle in history. Wittmann and his Tiger fought bitterly, claiming no less than 30 Soviet tanks. But after a week of hard and bloody fighting, Hitler was forced to call off the offensive, his last significant summer advance of the war in the East. Looking to salvage what they could from the disaster, Wittmann received the Knight's Cross and adorned many propaganda films and publications as he became known as the Black Baron, a play on World War I's Red Baron flying ace. After briefly relocating to Italy, Wittmann and his Tiger were back on the Eastern Front in late 1943, where he joined in the Wehrmacht's increasingly bitter battle to hold back the Soviets. Soon after, Hitler himself awarded Wittmann Oak Leaves to his Knight Cross for destroying a total of 117 enemy tanks. In April of 1944, Wittmann was relocated again, this time just northwest of Paris, right in time for the Allied landings in Normandy. Fighting with heavy SS Panzer Battalion 101, Wittmann and his comrades were soon ordered to attack the Allied landing zones to prevent them from breaking out. Commanding a company of 12 Tigers, the journey to Normandy was wrought with danger as the Allies enjoyed air superiority and ground attack P-51 Mustangs and Hawker Typhoons struck at will. Almost a week after the landings, Wittmann had arrived at the new front line in the west, but at the cost of 6 of his Tigers lost to air attack and breakdowns before they had encountered any Allied armor. On the morning of Tuesday, June 13th, 1944, Wittmann advanced on the village of Villers-Bocage to find that it had already fallen to the British Army's 7th Armoured Division. Advancing on his own, he caught the British by complete surprise, and shell after shell from his 88mm gun rained down on British tanks and armoured vehicles, while his machine gun killed scores of infantry. Eventually, however, the British were able to organise themselves and disabled his Tiger, forcing him to abandon it, but not before Wittmann had destroyed around a dozen Churchill tanks, as well as various other vehicles. The stunning victory only solidified the reputations of both Wittmann and the Tiger in the minds of the Allies. Such successes were becoming increasingly difficult for the Wehrmacht, however, in the days that followed. Allied air power, coupled with naval gunfire support, made approaching the landing zones an increasingly deadly affair, eventually allowing the Allies to break out. On August 8, 1944, Wittmann was ordered into action to attempt to blunt the Allied offensive. Leading a mixed force of Tigers, Panzer IVs and assault guns, Wittmann blundered into a trap set by a joint British and Canadian force of tanks. The Anglo-Canadian force were equipped with regular US-made M4 Shermans and a small number of Fireflies. Shermans modified by the British specifically to fight the Tiger, sporting a 17-pounder gun. During the attack, Wittmann's Tiger suffered a direct hit to the turret from a British Firefly, igniting the stowed ammunition for the deadly 88mm gun. In the resulting explosion, the entire turret was blown clear of the hull. After 138 confirmed kills to his credit, the Black Baron was no more. The 30-year-old's death was widely mourned in Germany, and he overshadowed the top tank ace of the time, Kurt Nispel, thanks to his elevation to a near-mythical hero in Nazi propaganda. Since the end of the war, some historians have debated the accuracy of his final tally. Like Nispel, he has his supporters who claim his actual score was significantly higher, while critics suggest it was lower. Regardless, few would deny that Wittmann was a near unstoppable force in battle, a terrifying power that arose when one of the greatest tankmen of all time commanded one of the greatest tanks ever created. And there you have the tale of Michael Wittmann, the Nazi Tiger champion. Please leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.